From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. The best is yet to come. That's what it says underneath the statue of Ted Rogers that sits in front of the Rogers Centre, the stadium where the Toronto Blue Jays play. While the late founder of Rogers Communications might have been talking about his company's corporate outlook, for the past week, that statement has been true for anyone who has been riveted watching the corporate intrigue and boardroom drama playing out in that company's highest level meeting rooms, as the Rogers family fights over control of one of Canada's largest telecommunications empires. It has been a fascinating feud, which has seen outrageous declarations on Twitter, the mayor of this country's largest city attempt to mediate, and the current situation where it seems like the media empire might have two boards of directors at the moment, with both fighting over which one has legitimate control. It also has links to the city's sports teams. It's complicated, but to help us navigate it, we are joined by Dobby, who is a business reporter at The Star. She joined us to detail the corporate drama at the top of Rogers Communications. Christine, I know you've been very busy covering the ins and outs of this story, so I really want to thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
I'm happy to be here. It has been a pretty wild weekend, I will say.
Okay, so I know you've been covering business for a really long time, and you were on the telecom beat for a very long time. So obviously, there's always some intrigue, but can you remember something like this power struggle happening in Canada? I mean, everyone just keeps likening it to the HBO show Succession. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there are definite parallels to the HBO show. I remember even when the show first came out, it's based on the family behind Fox, the Murdoch family, but I remember thinking that there were some parallels to the Rogers family at the time. But yeah, like you said, no one can remember anything like this in Canadian business history. I've been a business reporter for a decade, and colleagues that I've worked with who've been reporters for much longer periods of time cannot remember anything like this happening. It's really, really astonishing.
Okay, let's set the stage. This is a power struggle between the Rogers family. This starts with Ed Rogers, who it seems has decided that he wants to make some changes to the company's leadership. Who is he? What does he want? And maybe let us know some of the other players here.
Sure. So Ed Rogers is one of four children of Ted Rogers and Loretta Rogers. Ted was the founder of Rogers Communication, and Ted passed away in 2008. And since that time, Edward has been chair of the family trust that controls the voting shares of Rogers Communications. So I'm hoping to keep this straight for everybody, but there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of boards involved in this. But essentially, Edward has had this position as chairman of the family trust that controls the voting stock in Rogers.
And so right now, he wants to change some of the company's leadership. What does he want to do?
So the reporting has been that he wanted to replace the CEO, the current CEO, Joe Natale, with a candidate of his own who was the chief financial officer. His name is Tony Staffieri. And that the rest of the board ended up voting against that move in late September. And what followed from that was this sort of unusual announcement that Tony Staffieri was leaving the company immediately. And that was pretty shocking to see a chief financial officer leave a company like Rogers in the middle of trying to do a very big transaction. It's in the middle of trying to acquire Shaw right now. So reporting happened around that, and it was eventually revealed that he had been trying to put Tony in the CEO seat.
Now, this is one of the things that's been opposed by some other family members. I'd like to know who the players are on the other side. And one of the things I have to say is Martha Rogers has become sort of the must follow on Twitter across the country, if you ask me. She's been quite interesting in the last couple of days. But tell me who some of the other families are who are opposing Ed's moves.
Yeah, that's the thing about this story. It just keeps going in twists and turns you couldn't have predicted. I don't think anyone would have predicted that Martha Rogers' Twitter account would become the must-follow account this weekend. But here we are. Okay, so the other family members involved in this, the other family members who are directors of Rogers Communications, that's the company, are Loretta Rogers, who's Edward's mother, and his two sisters, Martha Rogers and Melinda Rogers Hickson. And so as this has evolved, it's become much more clear that those three women have really aligned against Edward. So they voted against him at the board level, and we understand that they've also been opposing him at the family trust level.
So he's facing all this opposition. He lost a spot on the board. Is this correct? Or being chair of the board? Or this is the part that I'm getting confused because let's just look. He wanted to get rid of the CEO. He was blocked with that. I believe they got him voted out as chair of the board. Now he's trying to create his own board. What exactly is happening here with that right now?
Yeah, so this was a series of really extraordinary developments last Thursday. He was voted out as chairman of the Rogers Communications Board, but he remained a board member. But later that evening, he announced that he would be using his position as chair of the family trust that controls the company's voting shares. Remember that other role that he has? He would be using that role to remove 5 of the directors from the Rogers Communications Board and replace them with 5 new people of his choosing. And he said that he could do this using a resolution that he delivered to the company. And the company and the previous board has disputed that he has the legal ability to do that. And this is going to likely head to court.
So, okay, to be clear, right now, does Rogers have 2 boards?
There is extreme uncertainty about this right now. They both claim to be the valid board of Rogers, and they're overlapping in a way. There's a number of people who are ostensibly on both boards. And Edward Rogers convened a meeting of his new board last night, Sunday evening, and announced after the meeting that he had been elected chair of that board. So he says that he is again the chair of the board of Rogers Communications. The other board disputes this. And so it's astounding to see this kind of uncertainty at one of the biggest publicly traded companies in the country.
Absolutely. Now, okay, Christine, I really want to pack something here because I believe Ed wants to make some of these changes because he feels that their competitors, Bell and Telus, have done better over the past few years. Does he have a point?
So this is definitely an argument that has been made, and Rogers shares have underperformed relative to Bell and Telus over the past few years. Some people would say in part that's because Rogers has a very big wireless division. It's the biggest wireless company in the country. And as you can imagine, wireless services were hit hard during the pandemic when people weren't leaving their houses, they weren't leaving the country, so Rogers wasn't getting roaming revenue from that. So it was hurt proportionately more than its rivals, Bell and Telus. But there's some arguments that it's about to start doing better because the economy is opening up again. People are doing more. They're using their phones more outside of their houses. And Rogers did actually report a pretty strong quarter on the wireless front just last Thursday.
The other thing about here, and you mentioned this, Rogers is in the midst of buying Shaw. This is a massive acquisition. I would expect that the opponents to Ed's board say that you need kind of a steady hand to integrate these into Rogers and that Ed's timing for this power play is not great. What is the thinking on that right now?
Yeah, it's definitely really unusual to see somebody try and replace a CEO in the midst of a deal like this. It's worth $26 billion when you include debt. And so that involves Rogers lining up a lot of financing, a lot of bank financing to get this done. Banks tend to like certainty and continuity. And there's some concern that everything that's been going on might make it harder for the company to complete the financing. We haven't seen any serious implications for the company yet in terms of credit downgrades or anything like that. But this is creating a lot of chaos around that. And we have seen that the company's shares were trading down about 5% just this morning.
We'll be right back.
Okay, so it's funny. There are a lot of people who probably are snoring about the cable, the wireless, and all of the comm stuff. But the story that you broke today with our Doug Smith is the kind of thing that I think is going to hit home for a lot of people because, of course, it's about Toronto's beloved sports. Now, the thing that you guys broke is that supposedly this past summer, Ed Rogers proved to be a roadblock to Masai Ujiri's, head of the Toronto Raptors, contract extension. Now, we also know that he tried to meddle in the Jays front office a few years back. But I think the thing for a lot of people here is that from the details of what Ed sort of was trying to do, there's some parallels and similarities potentially to what's happening here. And the fact that, this guy's willing to do some unorthodox things. Can you tell us a little bit about how Ed sort of meddled in Masai Ujiri's contract extension?
Yeah, so what we were hearing is that, as you mentioned, there may be some parallels to what's happening at the corporate level here, and that this might be really part of a larger pattern of how Edward tends to operate. But in this situation, and again, this gets complicated again because Rogers is a co-owner of the Toronto Raptors. You might have heard that Rogers and Bell together own Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. They both own a 37.5% stake in the company. And then Larry Tannenbaum holds the balance of the interest in Maple Leaf Sports. Maple Leaf Sports owns a number of our favorite franchises, including the Maple Leafs, Toronto FC, and the Toronto Raptors. So they're in charge of things like Masai Ujiri's contract. Masai is obviously pretty beloved in this city. He helped lead the team to a championship in 2019. His contract was up earlier this year, but they held off on negotiating it until mid-July. That's when they started sort of trying to work on the deal with him. At that point, it was felt that he deserved a higher compensation than he had received in his previous contract. He'd added tremendous value to the team. That was the thinking. And, the Raptors have been in the playoffs for many years, I think every year under his tenure. So they were negotiating a deal with him. But at the point where they were ready to make him an offer, our understanding is that Bell and Tannenbaum agreed on what to offer Masai, but that Edward felt it was too rich a deal and essentially wouldn't agree to it. And it's a complicated story, but things went on from there.
Well, I think the fascinating thing part of this too is that Edward also tried to change how basically the ownership of the Rogers thing worked and sort of wanted to separate the Leafs into another thing, which I'm sure would have even complicated matters further. Like the pattern here is this man sort of wants to change the rules of some of these engagements. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so one of the really interesting things that we learned in this reporting was that Edward set out a number of stipulations that he wanted to see happen for him to agree to Masai's contract. 11 of them were pretty much about Masai himself and his compensation, and it seems like the other partners dealt with them. But the 12th was actually Edward wanted to extract this benefit for his own business. So you may be aware that Rogers Communications owns the Toronto Blue Jays, and they own them outright. So all the Toronto teams, it seems like they're all owned by Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, but Rogers actually owns the Jays outright. Probably know that. If you want to watch a Jays game, you pretty much have to watch it on Sportsnet, right? So there's been thinking for a number of years that the Jays are undervalued because they're owned by this giant telecom and media company. And there's been some thinking that if they were separated out from that telecom and media company, that they might be given a higher valuation. And so what we learned in our reporting on this was that Edward wanted his partners in MLSE to agree to a situation where he could spin out the interests that Rogers has in the teams in MLSE and combine that with the Blue Jays into a separate company. And so accomplishing that would have been extremely complicated. It would have involved a lot of discussions around valuations of the teams and rights and control discussions. And ultimately, they wouldn't agree to that as part of this situation around Masai's contract.
The other interesting thing is here is that basically Larry Tannenbaum, as the governor, approved Masai's contract, as was his right. And it seems as though Ed Rogers wasn't fully aware of that and then kind of complained to the NBA about this. Is that fair to say too?
Yeah, so Larry Tannenbaum is actually the governor of the Toronto Raptors. And this is a position that, and you'll have to forgive me, I'm not an NBA expert, but I understand that a lot of NBA teams have this position. And the idea is to give this, at least one person have like deciding power over things like personnel issues, hiring people like Masai. So Larry Tannenbaum, Bell, and Rogers came to an impasse over the contract negotiations. And Larry eventually decided that he was going to make the call on it and make the deal with Masai. Edward was unhappy about this. We understand, according to the sources we spoke with, and he went to Adam Silver, who's the commissioner of the NBA, who confirmed to him that Larry did, in fact, have the power to do that.
I mean, that's a sojourn that I really wanted to go down. But let's get back to, Ed and the larger thing here. He's kind of being portrayed as a bit of the villain here, but he really is embracing an activist investor role within his own family business. Like, he hasn't done anything illegal per se, right? Like, this is part of his job to try and extract the best money for shareholders and for himself. Is that fair to say?
So yeah, I did speak with a governance expert last week who did actually make the comparison to sort of an activist investor. An activist investor would be someone who typically holds shares in a company and lobbies for changes to get better performance. In this case, it's a bit different because it's this family-controlled company, and he really does have absolute control over the company. So yeah, he does have this unique power, and it could be argued that he's using it similarly to how an activist investor might. I think some might question whether the benefit of what he's been doing is really going to accrue to the company when you see things like the share price tumbling today and a bit of the chaos that the company is in right now.
Okay, so what do you think is going to happen next? What do you hear is going to happen next?
This is day by day. This is hour by hour. This is a really, really unusual situation. But what we do know is we are expecting Edward's team to take this to court today. He's looking for confirmation that what he's done by creating his own new board of Rogers is in fact legal and that he's followed all the right procedures. So we do expect to see a court filing at some point today, and then we'll be in court. Like, the battle will continue.
Christine, what do you think it is that why people are riveted by this? Obviously, there's money, but I think it's the family drama aspect. I think it's Martha Rogers airing her beefs on Twitter and saying stuff like, bring it on. What do you think it is about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's long been a fascination in this city, in this country, with the Rogers family. I think that, earlier this year, we saw quite a big scandal over Suzanne Rogers, Edward Rogers' wife, posting a picture of the family on social media with Donald Trump at his hideaway in Mar-a-Lago. This family just seems to attract a lot of interest. You see, like, from Suzanne Rogers' social media, and you get a kind of a glimpse at their life, and you can see that they're living a very, very rich and privileged life. So I think that draws a lot of fascination in the city. Obviously, Rogers owns a lot of media properties, owns a lot of sports properties. This is a Toronto story. It's a media story. It's a family drama story. I think that's why it's translating to interest in people who are not usually interested in business stories.
Well, you did a fantastic job covering for us. Christine, this has been so great for us. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think our listeners should know?
I think just keep reading. We're going to keep churning out the content on this. It's a really astounding story, and it's not over yet.
Christine, I want to thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Christine Dobby is a business reporter at The Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm your host, Raju Mudler. Our This Matters team is Adrian Chung, Brian Bradley, JP Fozo, Matt Hearn, Morgan Bachneck, Saba Etizaz, and Sean Pattenden. Our music is by So-Called, Mike DeAngelis, and Sean Pattenden. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com/subscribingmatters. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.